I just got a phone call from work. Well, I thought I was going to be going back, but they told me I'm off until June now. Well, I should probably tell him. I'm having to pretend that I'm in work. So on the days that I would normally work, I'm not answering messages and telling people that I'm busy in work when really I'm sat at home. If I said that I was off work, I would have to come up with some sort of explanation that I don't have, because why else would I be off work? So I've been having conversations with my mum and telling her that I've gone back to work after Matt's nearly cut his finger off, when really I'm not. So I feel awful lying to her. I think I was off for about 2.5, 3 weeks with Matt cutting his hand. So we're getting a bit bored. Definitely just sick of being in the house and want to get out. I find that I start to feel a bit funny if I'm in the house for too long. Like, we tend to start to go for walks everywhere and just try and get out the house a bit. But there's only so much you can walk in the same places before you get very, very bored. Let's start from the beginning. When I miscarried the first time, obviously I hadn't miscarried before, so I didn't expect that it was going to happen. My ideas of pregnancy was, I was oblivious to like the side that I had never seen before. I thought that the moment that I found out I was pregnant, I thought I'm going to have another baby. I didn't think there was any chance that I wouldn't be able to carry that pregnancy, and I had no idea anything would be wrong with it. When I got pregnant with the first miscarriage, I didn't change anything that I was doing. I was still, I was moving tables, I was lifting, I was still in work doing the same jobs, so I was still lifting like heavy things of juice. I didn't change anything. And for about 2 weeks before I actually miscarried, I was getting like a weird cramping, which I thought at the time was growing pains, because I know I had similar cramping with Isaac when I was pregnant with him, but then I started bleeding, which I had experienced bleeding with the pregnancy with Isaac, but that was further into it. I don't think it was until after like 16 weeks or something like that, I think it was. This bleeding was different. It was heavy, there were clots. So I went in for a scan in the emergency department, and they found a heartbeat and everything was fine. They said they didn't see any abnormalities, everything looked perfect. They couldn't see any bleeding on the scan. So I thought, oh, this is great, everything's fine, I'm just worrying about nothing until the next day when I actually miscarried. When you have your first miscarriage, it's devastating, because obviously you don't expect that to happen. All you've ever known is to either, I mean, it depends on whether you've been pregnant before having the miscarriage. I had a successful pregnancy and had Isaac, as you all know. But with this one, it really, really got to me. Especially since my sister was pregnant at the same time. And she thankfully had a successful pregnancy, and she now has her baby. I got pregnant again after, I think it was about 3 months after the miscarriage, and everything was fine, going along well. I had extremely bad morning sickness with the second one. My manager was amazing when I was pregnant with the second miscarriage. She just, anything that she could help with, she did help. She had me doing no heavy lifting at all, nothing like that, but she was just amazing. But about 7 weeks into the pregnancy, again, I started bleeding, and it was light at first. I was actually in work when the bleeding started, which I didn't really know what to do, because with the first one, I was lucky enough to start bleeding at home, but with the second one, that didn't happen. I was actually in work, and the emotions that overtake you when you have a bleed when you're pregnant, especially after having a miscarriage before, it's emotions that nobody could ever explain, and I could not describe that gut punching feeling of, oh my god, not again. I went home from work because obviously I was having a bleed. I'd had a miscarriage before, it was really concerning. I went home and the bleeding stopped. Now, it was on a Sunday that I started bleeding, so I never rang the hospital that day. I rang them on the Monday morning because I was aware that they only did scans during the week. They weren't going to scan me on a Sunday, so it was kind of pointless going in, because all they're going to do is the speculum exam. They're going to open you up, they're going to tell you that your cervix is either closed or open, but it's not going to change the outcome to what happens. So I waited until the Monday. I got in to be seen, but they didn't have any spaces for scans. So they did the speculum exam like I was expecting, and they told me that my cervix was closed, and they could see obviously that I was bleeding. I was bleeding quite heavily when I went in to be seen by the hospital, and they said everything, as far as they're concerned, because my cervix was closed, they said everything looks fine, and they sent me home and they booked a scan for the next day. Unfortunately, I never got my scan in time. I actually miscarried the night before I got the scan, and because I'd miscarried before, I knew that it had happened. I mean, you can't not realise what's going on, because it's so obvious when it happens. Like, that's why I was unsure at first when I had the really light bleeding, if it was another miscarriage. The bleeding was really light at first with the second one. And it was so light that you could tell it was bleeding and it was concerning, but it wasn't so heavy that I thought straight away, you know, oh, I'm miscarrying again. It wasn't until the day after that it was really bad, and I was in absolute agony, as you can imagine. And I knew I'd miscarried that night. I went into that scan and I actually said to them, look, I know I've miscarried. This is kind of just to confirm it. And because I miscarried before the scan, it went down as what they call a pregnancy of an unknown location. Now this is only because they haven't scanned you before, so they don't know for certain that you are pregnant. So with this, you have to get a blood test to make sure that you were pregnant. So they check your hormone levels. They also have to check levels to make sure it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy. So if they saw an increase in hormones, then that would indicate that it's an ectopic pregnancy, which they did think possibly that's what it could be. Because you can also get really heavy bleeding with that. And if they check your levels and then they check it again and it decreases, that obviously indicates a miscarriage. So I got a blood test the same day that I had the scan, and they told me to wait 72 hours, so 3 days, and go back in and get another blood test and make sure that it wasn't ectopic, basically. Thankfully it wasn't ectopic, and so it went down as miscarriage. I ended up having more time off with the second miscarriage from work than I did with the first one, because I actually had on and off bleeding for 6 weeks after miscarrying, which, as you can imagine, drains you because you're losing a lot of blood, but also it's very painful, very, very painful. I just ended up absolutely exhausted and I was just fed up. I wanted it all to be just over and done with. I never once thought that I would have to make this video. Everything seemed fine. I had a scan at 6 weeks. Well, I was 5 weeks, 3 days when they scanned me. And that was because I was entitled to an early scan after having 2 consecutive miscarriages. That's something they offer. They call it a reassurance scan. They weren't going to offer it to me because of COVID-19, which is completely understandable. But at the time I was having cramping only in one side of my abdomen, along with pain in one shoulder. Those 2 symptoms together are symptoms of an ectopic pregnancy. So they got me in for an early scan to make sure that it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy. And sure enough, it wasn't. It was a normal pregnancy. It was in the right place, but I did have a small bleed behind it. Now they said not to worry about it. They said it was so minute that it was nothing that they would be concerned about. On the scan it looked huge, but that's because the baby was so small. Side by side it looked to be quite big, but obviously with the baby being so small, like, it didn't even have a heartbeat. It was that small. In fact, I couldn't even see the baby because it was that small. All I could see was the yolk sac. That was it. And so I went away from the appointment quite happy. And then everything was fine. I was so exhausted for the whole of the time that I was pregnant. But I had that with Isaac as well, and I thought that was quite normal. So I thought, oh, this is great, it's going really well, until I got to 9 weeks pregnant. I had actually that day got the at-home fetal Doppler to listen to the baby's heartbeat. And so I was trying to find the heartbeat. But I couldn't find it. Now, I know that when you're trying to find the heartbeat that early, sometimes you just can't find it. And so I actually recorded that, me trying to find the heartbeat. Can't find it, so I'll try again later. Sometimes you can't find it, which is fine. I know now that I couldn't find the heartbeat because it didn't have one. But at the time, I didn't know that until about 10 minutes after I tried to look for the heartbeat, I started bleeding. I couldn't have a scan. I couldn't go in for a scan because of COVID-19 again. They were trying to limit the amount of people going in to get scans and to be seen unless it was absolutely necessary. Now, I completely understood their decision and completely backed them with it, because at the end of the day, if you're going to miscarry, it's going to happen whether you have a scan or not. And because I had already had a scan, they knew that I was 100% pregnant. So it wouldn't go down as an unknown location of pregnancy, or it wouldn't go down as a possible ectopic, because they knew it wasn't, and they knew that I was pregnant. So there was nothing else that they could do. The only thing that they could do if you went into hospital is give you pain medication, and even then, until they can confirm a miscarriage, you can't take off pain medication anyway. So I knew that that was the right decision, to just stay at home and wait it out, especially with the risk of getting COVID-19. I was bleeding for about 3 days with big clots, and I had actually thought that I had already miscarried. I think it was either the day after that I started bleeding or 2 days after. I can't quite remember, but I know it was 3 days after I started bleeding. I actually miscarried, and I know 100% that I miscarried that day, because unfortunately I actually saw the baby, which, as you can imagine, was absolutely heartbreaking. So the first thing I wanted to do was ring my mum. So I did. But it was just nice to tell someone, because as you know, we didn't tell anyone. No one. Only the people that needed to know, so work. And so it was nice to be able to tell her what I'd been going through for the past 9 weeks. And it's been hard. It's only been a month since I miscarried. I've tried to bring myself to make this video, but as you can imagine, it's so hard to talk about it. It's hard enough to go through one miscarriage, but to go through and have 3, one after another, all in the space of a year. It's been exactly a year this month since I got pregnant with the first one. And like the last miscarriage, I've had some complications with this one. I went for the scheduled scan. I ended up having to go back into the emergency room, well, the emergency department, because when they scanned me, I told them that I'd miscarried, and I told them why I knew, and they were all absolutely amazing in the hospital. They make you feel so comfortable talking about it. But when they scanned me, I still had pregnancy tissue left that hadn't passed. Now, this had been a week since I miscarried, so that was quite concerning for me, because obviously there's an increased risk of infection, which can turn into sepsis, which is not good. So to try and pass the tissue, they gave me some medication to make me cramp, like to contract. I can't for the life of me remember what it's called, but I think it was 3 tablets, and I think it was 2 days after I had the medication, I passed more tissue. So I think that was the last of it, and then about a week later I stopped bleeding. I was told to take a pregnancy test 3 weeks after the miscarriage. Taking a pregnancy test after having a miscarriage is difficult, because it was only a few weeks ago that you were taking a pregnancy test to find out that you were pregnant, and now you're having to take a pregnancy test to make sure that you don't have the hormone left. It's almost, you almost feel like it's unfair that you have to do that, because you should be, at that point, I should have been having my 12-week scan, and instead I'm taking a pregnancy test to make sure that I've miscarried properly. And I do actually have to get back in touch with the hospital, because my pregnancy test was still positive, and at this point it shouldn't be. To go through so much loss in such a short period of time, it almost makes you feel like it almost feels like you're incapable of carrying a child. Now, I know I'm not, because I have had Isaac, and I know that my body is capable of doing that, but I'm also rhesus negative. So it means that if my baby is a positive blood group, my body naturally rejects it. So it's possible that it's that. But now, because I've had 3 consecutive miscarriages, I've actually been referred to the miscarriage specialist, who basically looks into why it's happening. So the doctor that spoke to me about that did say 9 times out of 10 they can't find a reason. It's just an unfortunate situation that you've had 3 miscarriages, and it's not likely that you'll have another one, which is obviously what we'd hope for. But it's nice to know that it's getting looked into, and that if there is a problem, it's going to be addressed. Yeah. So that's been my journey for the last year. It's been difficult, but we're sticking together and we're getting through it.